You know, calculus, it's basically the mathematical language of the universe, right? It describes motion, change. It's the engine behind so much of our modern world. But the story of where it came from? Oh, it's not some quiet tale of a lone genius having a eureka moment. Nope. It's a story of an all-out war. So, let's get right into it. The whole thing boils down to one simple but totally explosive question. Who actually came up with calculus first? You had two of the greatest minds of the 17th century, and both would claim it was their invention. And let me be clear, this was not some polite academic debate over tea. Oh no, we are talking about a nasty, decades-long, bare-knuckle brawl filled with accusations, secret plots, and public shaming that would literally split the scientific world in two for 100 years. All right, so let's meet our two contenders. In this corner, from England, you've got the giant of physics, Isaac Newton. He was brilliant, but also famously secretive, a man who claimed he'd worked out his version of calculus long before anyone else. And in the other corner, from Germany, we have Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a true polymath, a diplomat, a philosopher, and the guy who was actually the first to publish his calculus for the world to see. Okay, so for years, this tension was just kind of simmering beneath the surface, kept to private letters in academic circles. But then, in the early 1700s, this Cold War went hot. It exploded into a full-blown public fight. So the first shot is fired, and it comes from Leibniz's camp. It's this anonymous review in a journal, and it basically implies Newton just slapped a new name on Leibniz's ideas. To really twist the knife, it compares him to this other mathematician, Fabry. Now, you might not have heard of Fabry, but back then, everyone knew he was famous for one thing: ripping off another guy's work. The message was crystal clear. Newton's a thief. You can bet England didn't take that lying down. The comeback was fast and it was brutal. A Newtonian supporter, a guy named John Keel, he doesn't mess around with subtle insults. He just comes right out and says it. Leibniz saw Newton's work, changed the symbols, and published it as his own. Boom. A direct charge of plagiarism. The gloves were officially off. So with accusations this serious flying around, we've got to play detective. We need to go back and look at the actual evidence. What really happened, and just as importantly, when? All right, this timeline is absolutely key to understanding the whole mess. Check this out. Way back in the 1660s, Newton develops his method of fluxions. But, and this is a huge but, he keeps it almost entirely to himself. Then, in 1675, Leibniz has his own huge breakthrough, totally on his own. A year later, he does see some of Newton's unpublished papers in London, but they're mostly about other stuff. And then, the key events. In 1684, Leibniz publishes. It's not until 3 years later that Newton finally publishes his masterpiece, the Principia. And while it uses calculus, he doesn't actually explain his method. You see how messy this is getting? And it wasn't just when they did it was how. They literally invented two different languages for calculus. Newton had his fluxions, which used these little dots over letters. Kind of clunky. But Leibniz, he came up with the elegant notation we all know and, struggle with today, the dy dx. It was just more intuitive, more powerful, and spoiler alert, it's the one that won out in the end. So, okay, looking at all this, Newton invents it first, but secretly. Leibniz invents it independently and publishes it first. You'd think they could just shake hands and share the credit, right? So how on earth did this escalate into a full-blown war that needed an official ruling? Well, things got so toxic that by 1712, the scientific world just couldn't take it anymore. They decided they needed to settle this once and for all. So the Royal Society of London, the most respected scientific group in England, put together a supposedly impartial committee. Their job was to sift through all the evidence and declare the one true inventor. And the verdict comes back, and it is a complete, total, knockout victory for Newton. The report declared him the first inventor, period. And it basically called Leibniz a liar who had hidden his knowledge of Newton's earlier work. It seemed final, case closed. But was it? I mean, whenever a decision is that one-sided, you've got to start asking some hard questions about who was actually running the show. And this is where the story gets absolutely wild. Remember that impartial committee? Guess who was the president of the Royal Society, the guy in charge of the whole investigation? Yep, Isaac Newton. And who do you think secretly wrote the committee's final report? The one that just happened to find him completely innocent and his rival totally guilty? You guessed it, Isaac Newton. It was a complete sham, a kangaroo court where Newton himself was the prosecutor, judge, and jury, all to secure his own legacy. So what's the real story? Well, today, historians are all on the same page. It was a classic case of what we call simultaneous and independent invention. Two brilliant people, working separately, arrived at the same incredible idea. Newton got there first in private, Leibniz got there on his own, and was the first to share it with the world. Nobody plagiarized anybody, it was just a tragic collision of two monumental egos. That verdict might have been a sham, but the damage it caused was very, very real. This whole feud left a massive scar across the scientific world. Just look at how this broke down. Science basically split into two teams. You had Great Britain on Team Newton and the rest of Europe on Team Leibniz. The Brits, out of pure loyalty, stuck with Newton's clunky dot notation. Meanwhile, everyone else was using Leibniz's much better system and just taking off. They were making huge leaps forward in math, while Britain basically got left in the dust. Now, to be fair, the isolation wasn't a total brick wall. You still had brilliant British mathematicians doing great work, like the famous Euler-Maclaurin formula, which was definitely noticed and respected over on the continent. But the big picture trend? Stagnation in Britain and an explosion of progress everywhere else. So why? Why couldn't they just share the credit? This quote from Newton himself really says it all. In the 17th century, the whole idea of two people inventing something independently just didn't compute. In their minds, there could only be one first inventor. Anyone who came after, even if they did it all on their own, was automatically a thief. Second inventors, as he put it, had no rights. And that's what it all comes down to, right? You have two of history's greatest minds, each with a legitimate claim to one of science's most powerful tools. But instead of collaborating, they and their followers spent decades at war. So you have to wonder, what might they have achieved together? And how much did their very human conflict ultimately cost science?